Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. What we're going to talk about how to save 1% of your turnover, and ideally add that to your bottom line. The agenda, as you saw from the invite, is primarily around thoughts on using credit cards. Credit cards are used to settle B2B transactions these days. And we think there's a bigger opportunity to shift some of this volume in order to benefit actually all of the parties, and that's what we're going to explore through this webinar today. So we're going to look at the likes and dislikes for suppliers and buyers, and what are the other options to achieve the same thing, the same objective for all the parties, but at a much lower cost. The invite was sent out primarily to existing customers. So I already assume, you all know what Travel Ledger is, but we have a couple of people that have signed up also that are not existing customers. So just really as a very quick reminder, what is Travel Ledger? Travel Ledger is the global network for travel supplier to submit invoices for automatic and insured settlement by trade customers. So that's basically the essence of what Travel Ledger does, allows B2B settlement for the travel industry in a way that is automatic and insured. So going back to now the topic really of using cards for B2B payments in travel, what are some of the key thoughts that come into the discussion whenever this is looked at as a topic? There are basically three main elements to it that really cards bring into the equation. One is protection. What we hear is, I always get paid if the agent fails or they can't pay. So that's what the supplier says, and that's pretty much the equivalent of trade credit insurance. Or from a buyer perspective is, if the supplier fails, I can get the original funds back. And that, in a way, for the buyer, for the agent, is the supplier failure insurance equivalent. So cards provide protection. That's one of the key elements. On the other side, the other big topic around cards is chargebacks. And often the argument, especially from the buyer perspective, is, well, if the supplier fails to deliver a service, I can get the money back. However, this is not actually true in all cases. We've seen when credit cards are used on a transaction by transaction, getting chargebacks, it's a lot easier than if you have paid a big statement for £100,000, for example, on a single card transaction, which is happening in the industry. Then in that case, is not so black and white to just call the card company and say, hey, I have a chargeback for £100,000. It's a very, very different. So we've seen plenty of cases where chargebacks are not actually a reality when it comes into real life, when people are trying to recover a larger amount. So that's not it is a point of contention, obviously, but it's not is not really that black and white all the time. And what sometimes is the elephant in the room is the fact that there are kickbacks that actually go around in the industry. Agents, buyers get revenue share from virtual cards or payment companies who actually now openly advertise. We've all received emails saying, turn your payments in an extra revenue stream. So card companies, payment companies charge extra to the supplier, and with that money, they then give kickbacks to the buyers, which again, in a B2B environment where companies have commercial relationships, we don't really think that should be necessarily the case or the best way of operating. So keeping this in mind, what we really want to look at today is, are cards really the best payment method for high value or high volume B2B transactions? So let's have a quick look at it. and say, well, what from a supplier perspective, what do suppliers think about credit, debit, virtual cards? On the likes, obviously, there is the guaranteed payment. Obviously, if the buyer fails, then the supplier still receives their funds. And obviously, there's also a preference towards bank cards rather than or debit cards rather than some of the other type of cards, because obviously they settle faster and the fees are cheaper. But these are the main likes. On the dislike side, this is a lot bit of a longer list. You've got high collection charges, which in the industry are anywhere between 1.3 and 2.8% kind of base. Then if somebody's using virtual cards, actually the fees are even higher because that's a customer non-present type of transaction. So from a security profile, it's considered to be more risky. So there's an extra premium. Plus, then you've got foreign exchange, sometimes charges, depends where the card was issued, where is your point of sale. So really, you're looking at, on average in the industry, we're looking at 1.5% on a good day that the supplier is charged to use a card. Then there is the issue of chargebacks, which we said is not always applicable, but in many cases now, some buyers have actually automated the process of asking for chargebacks. So you always have this issue, and sometimes chargebacks are actually used for dispute resolution, which makes it even more time-consuming and costly to even fight those. Settlement speed, yes, you're going to guarantee a payment, but it doesn't necessarily, not all the cards actually settle particularly quickly when it comes to actually the supplier receiving the funds. Also, there is when it comes to virtual cards, they're actually not always guaranteed. So there is a case that with virtual cards, you can set a number of criterias. For example, one of the criteria is when that card will become active. So if when they're used for bookings in the future, the buyer can actually set a date for that card to become active. And if they are future dated, those cards, they can actually be canceled. So in the case of a virtual card, when somebody gets a virtual card number, they're not always necessarily guaranteed. And when it comes to using cards for statements collection, this is mostly a manual process. One thing is integrated into a booking engine. There's one booking, one payment, one booking, one payment. But when they're used for multiple bookings, invoice settlement, and things like that, 99% of the time that actually becomes a more manual process. So there's a loss of automation in that case, which is both lamented actually from a supplier and a buyer perspective, as we will see. So kickbacks obviously to the buyers is a dislike from a supplier perspective. So the key point really from a supplier perspective, the number one positive is the guaranteed payment. So suppliers tend to use cards because they know they're going to be paid in the majority of cases as an alternative to insurance. So now if we look at it from a buyer perspective, what do buyers like? Obviously, they like the kickbacks, which can really vary depending on the type of program, the volumes, and a number of reasons, but it could become a considerable source of revenue. Chargebacks, obviously there's an element of protection, and if they have this element of protection, then the buyer doesn't have to worry about getting supplier failure insurance. Cards are in general liked by trustees, so when companies use trust accounts, the trustees like the use of cards because they think about chargebacks, and they see that as a relatively safe way and to release funds if they know that the funds are actually paid by card. And then automation, some of the buyers have managed to actually do some element of automation when it comes to using cards, as we said, primarily when booking single products and not always for all of them. So what do the buyer don't like about credit and debit cards is that often these programs are prepaid. So they don't really get any credit benefit. They have to constantly top up the cards in order to be able to use them. Or even some of the larger companies that get a little bit of credit, really the credit is very limited, is down to 2 to 3 days at the maximum. Also the fact that, as I said, some buyers have realized that chargebacks are not always automatic. They're not always successful. There's a lot of manual processing involved when cards are used for multiple bookings. And often also there are transaction limits issues. So especially with virtual cards, when a card is issued for a specific amount, where it is authorized only up to a certain amount, if there's a change in the booking and at some point the total amount changes, some of these cards can get declined, so they need to go back and be reissued. So they are not always, it's not always possible to automate it as much as possible. And as we said, especially when it comes to statements and things like that. And that process, it gets repeated for each supplier. And so for every supplier, they need to get a card, authorizations, and all that. So when we look at it then from the buyer perspective, really the key points are, the kickbacks and chargebacks. So that's why buyers, if you say they like using cards because they get some money back, and they know that there's an element of protection that they can build into their process. So going back to the question, is it really the best way? Are there alternatives? What if there was a similar mechanism that could give us different results? So let's look at the mechanism. When we have sellers and buyers in a card clearing environment, you've got the bookings that is made or is invoiced. It gets that information, it gets sent to the credit card company, not the data necessarily, but in that case, only the payment information is sent to the processing card. The buyers make sure that there are funds. If there are funds available, then there's an auto-paid payment or rejection. And that is really only limited to the funds. Now, if we look at the travel ledger process, the process is actually very similar. So within a flow, travel ledger can really be plugged into a similar flow, because you've got the supplier, so the booking being made with the supplier, or when it gets made or invoiced, that information together with the travel data is sent to travel ledger. The buyer, again, just needs to make sure, obviously, that they have enough funds. And if there are funds available, then travel ledger returns to the supplier not only the funds to say yes, it's being paid or not being paid, but actually the data that is reconciled back from the buyer, because obviously the buyer has a lot more control over the data when the data goes through travel ledger. This is a very, very high level, obviously. We can go into more of the detail around how exactly it works in the detail, if anybody is interested particularly in looking at this. But at a macro level, as you can see, the flow is actually very similar. So travel ledger can be used in environments where there are already certain processes that are using cards, and it can be used as an alternative. So if we look at it, back to the questions, are cards the most suitable payment method benefiting all the parties? Well, not really, because we believe that this can be done at a much more affordable price. So when we look at what is the offering of travel ledger compared to the traditional cards, we can see that the same type of transactions can be done at a much more affordable price. So, for example, if we look at our Pro subscription level, you've got a comparable cost of 32 pence per transaction. Again, depends on volumes, but on average, 32 pence per transaction is much more cost effective than 1.5% of the value of the booking for the majority of the cases. And there you've got fast settlement with no chargebacks. You have instant payment on the due date, and the funds are cleared within 24 hours, so the supplier actually gets access to the funds very, very quickly. And the whole process can be fully automated, depending on and the collection times can be variable. So you could actually even have 5-minute cycles where somebody makes a booking, the booking engine files the information into Travel Ledger. Travel Ledger, within a few seconds and actually a few minutes, can even transfer the funds immediately into the wallet of the supplier. So that's kind of one extreme, where you have, if you like, almost a real-time clearing methodology, to the method where you send a statement, you got weekly, monthly cycles, or even on demand. This is one of the things that we're implementing, is where the buyer can actually go in and select certain transactions and say, right, I want to pay these transactions now. So the process is automated and very, very customizable, and everything is fully transparent. There's no extra charge for the supplier to subsidize kickbacks to the buyer. Everybody knows where they are, how much it costs. So Pro is, if you like, our Pro subscription is addresses the cost-effective side of things, which is what obviously the supplier prefers. And then there is the second point is premium. So with premium, then that's where we address the guarantee element. So as a supplier, if you want to be guaranteed that you're going to get your money, get your funds in case of a buyer failure, then premium at a cost of 0.44% of the booking transaction value can give you that guarantee. So again, this is much lower than what you would need to pay for that same service through a credit card. So what's very important, that similar to cards, the failure protection is actually both ways. So not only the supplier is protected for the buyer failure, but the buyers also are protected by the supplier failure insurance. So it really is comparable to what you get with a credit card, where both the buyer and the seller have an element of protection against the counterparty failure. The premium subscription on Travel Ledger offers you exactly the same level of cover, but as we said, supplier can save 1 to 1.4% of fees depending on the subscription level, which in some cases can be even up to 10% of profit margin. So having that level of cost reduction can make a real difference to the supplier bottom line. And as I said, it addresses what are the most important benefits that both buyers and seller look at when they look at cards, which is protection, so guarantee, and obviously for the supplier especially, the cost-effective side of things. So in a nutshell, as I said, without getting too much into the nitty-gritty details, this is our proposition. The proposition is there is an opportunity to shift volumes from a credit card settlement in the travel industry, in the B2B space, to more cost-effective methods that also give you the same level of protection. So I have a little bit of time to see if there's any question that has come from the audience. While maybe people think about it, one of the points that I get always asked when I talk about this topic is, well, yes, but the buyer, obviously they don't like the fact that they lose the kickback. So let's quickly address that. obviously the kickback is something that the buyers in this particular scenario don't get from the payment company. Having said that, we see that as a commercial issue. So, you know, if the supplier saves 1%, 1.5%, there's no reason why the potentially the supplier can offer better commission conditions to the buyer, or benefiting from the protection can offer credits. So that's another thing that often buyers appreciate more than anything else, is the ability to have a little bit more time to pay. So from a supplier perspective, if you're on a premium subscription, you've got the 0.44% cost, but because you're protected, you can give a little bit more credit to your buyer. That will benefit them anyway, and you still save 1%. So that's the that's one kind of thing to think about. And I always encourage, you know, buyers and suppliers just to have a very transparent conversation, you know, rather than these kind of backroom deals that are done. Oh, I do this, I'll give you that, you know, through third parties, in a way that the supplier really has no say as to where some of those costs kind of go. And then at least it's fully transparent. You know, buyers and seller can negotiate. They know what the deal is, and as I said, there are no backroom deals that are done. It's a little bit like you know, it happens in the GDS space, where for many years the airlines were charged for the kickbacks, you know, that were given to the agents. That's something that didn't necessarily always last, and it's not always the best way to do business in our opinion. So offer credit or split the difference. That's what we normally say to suppliers as a way to address that issue.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
In regards to the full automation with the variable collection, I just want to ask, is there a process where when the statement or the invoice is sent to the buyer and they make payment, the payment can automatically reflect on their files or bookings on the seller side?
Yeah, absolutely. Because at any moment in time, Travel Ledger is available to the buyer and the seller, you know, either by accessing the portal or through an API. The moment the buyer says, yes, okay, I want to pay it, or if the agreement is that the money is taken automatically, you know, within a few seconds, then the seller immediately gets the notification that that transaction has been paid. And so that they can then reflect that into their booking system. So just to give you an example, the way that sometimes this is being used is the buyer calls the supplier or goes to the website of the supplier, makes the booking. The supplier says, okay, the booking, I'm holding the booking for you for 24 hours. You need to pay me within 24 hours. Otherwise, the booking gets automatically canceled. At that point, the supplier files the transaction into Travel Ledger. Travel Ledger processes the payments, gives back a message saying the buyer has paid, in which case the booking then can be confirmed on the supplier side. If the buyer doesn't have enough funds, or if the buyer decides not to settle that one transaction, then at the expiration of that option or whatever, then the supplier can just cancel the transaction. So that's, for example, one of the flows that could be put in place in order for the supplier to be able to know immediately if the transaction is confirmed, if the funds have been settled. And once the funds have been moved, there is no kind of going back. So the money is immediately in the digital account of the supplier, they can use those funds to do whatever they want to do.
Thank you. So in the instance where the money is with the supplier,
Yep.
can it not be added to the buyer's booking immediately, like sort of automated system where the seller doesn't do anything, and then once the buyer pays, the money will go straight into that booking that was made by the buyer?
Absolutely. That's exactly how it works.
Okay.
Yeah, the money gets automatically allocated to that booking when it gets paid. This is
Great.
where Travel Ledger, it's not just about payment information, but Travel Ledger marries booking data with payment information. So whenever there is a payment, either for an individual booking or if somebody's paying 1,000 bookings at the time, Travel Ledger immediately always tells you which booking has been paid, which booking hasn't been paid, which booking was paid partially because there was a dispute on the amount. So the supplier side always has the granular detail of every booking and how much money is being allocated to that individual booking.
Okay. So how is that done? Is it through API, or you have a system where you need to marry the two together?
No, they are married automatically on the platform in Travel Ledger. There's an API available to both sides. But especially when we have large amounts of transactions going through, we also have other mechanisms like a transaction file upload and what we call a return file, or the equivalent of a remittance that tells you these are the bookings that the buyer has paid. These are all the amounts, and at that point that the funds are already in your digital account.
Great. I'm one of the suppliers, so I just want to make my work quite easier. So if it's going to work that way, then it's okay. It's fine with me. All right. Thanks.
Fantastic. Right. I don't know if there's any other question. It doesn't look like it. So I'm going to kind of move on. Before I close, I just wanted to also give you a little bit of an update of where we are in terms of Travel Ledger. Obviously, we have over 1,000 businesses now on board. We process over 70 million per month. We have a number of partners and obviously a large number of suppliers coming on board. But one of the key points that I wanted to remind everyone today is that Travel Ledger is now available everywhere in the UK and the EU. So although we originally launched with in partnership with ABTA, and then we had Advantage come on board, now Travel Ledger is available to any travel company, even outside those memberships. And we're starting to expand in other markets. We've obviously become a preferred supplier for Travel Centre in Ireland. We're working especially in the Italian market. But if you're a supplier, you can now invite your agents or your buyers to come on board in any market in the UK and EU, and settlement can be multi-currency. So pounds, euros, and US dollars can be transacted via the platform. So in closing, really, we think that now is the time to make the shift. Think about the fact that for every million of B2B card volume that you can shift to a platform like Travel Ledger, you can add a minimum of £10,000 to your bottom line. So if you're transacting, if you've got £10 million going of B2B volume going through your platforms, that could be £100,000 added to your bottom line. And we know that speaking to many of the suppliers, there are still huge volumes that are going through B2B settlement for large statements in the UK and in Europe in general, when it comes to settlement for travel. So thank you very much for your time today. If you want to find out more, as I said, today was kind of a generic overview. Get in touch either by email or if you're already a customer, contact your account manager, and we'll be happy to look at your specific requirements and explain more in detail how we can add 1% to your bottom line. Thank you.